the education program coordinator for American Journal Experts, which is located in Durham, North Carolina, but he has the good taste to live in Chapel Hill.
All right, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation to come here and following a fabulous presentation that Aaron just made. Yeah, number one. There we go.
Can you please get closer to the microphone?
Sure. Sorry about that. That's okay. Is that better for people in the back? Okay, wonderful. Okay, well, thank you. My name is Ben Mudrak. I do work for American Journal Experts, and I want to talk today about how to understand the needs of international authors. So maybe they don't have the resource of being in Qatar and having Q Science work with them to disseminate their work. Maybe they need a hand from the specific journal itself. You may be just running your own journal somewhere or be a big publisher, anything like that. Okay, I wanted to take 2 seconds just to talk about where I'm coming from and what our company is. So at AJE, we really want to accelerate discovery, period, across the world. But we kind of do that one researcher at a time. So how can we help one person get their work published? So we do edit, translate, format, review, peer review, thousands of manuscripts, and our primary customers are second language authors. These are, like he said, the language of science is really English as a second language. I like that. And we've also branched out. Some of our services are not just strictly forming the manuscript, but we do journal recommendation, and now we do educational workshops and other things like that. And in our experience with our customers at all times, we've really understood that they want a little bit of assistance throughout this publication process. They want to make it smoother. They don't want to have to take the time and struggle with each aspect of the publication process. Okay, so I think these are fairly intuitive. I just listed a few.
I mean, obviously, what are the benefits? Why reach out to second language authors? And clearly, science and research in general is a global effort, and we need all hands on deck, and we need to be able to read and disseminate the research from anywhere in the world. Obviously, you reach more readers if you are drawing them in as authors. Then the journal is entering their world. They're talking about it among their colleagues. And if they have some tools ahead of time and can make the process more easy, then it reduces the burden for customer service and for editing once the journal gets the manuscript. Okay, so what do we need to do? I think that one of the big keys is understanding the difficulties that they face. What are the trouble points in the publication process? One of the ways to do that is to solicit their suggestions for ways to improve it. This is not the only way, and sometimes people don't always know exactly what they need, but this is one way that we did a little bit of. And then once you find some ways, especially simple ways that you can just take a quick step forward, just go ahead and implement them. Okay, so we did send a customer survey out, and we focused the majority of the questions on the challenges faced during the submission process and on getting suggestions for what would help them make that process faster. So we sent it to all of our active customers. We ended up getting about 2,500 responses, and it covered about 88 countries. So we felt pretty good. We were getting an interesting mix, and I'll tell you a little bit about the demographics of our respondents. And this is not by any means you need to memorize, but I just wanted to illustrate sort of the global nature of the pool of responses that we got. So there are clearly some hot spots, Brazil and China being the hottest, but you see that there's European countries, anywhere that's blue we got some responses from. This is like a heat map. And we did get a number of responses from people within the US who nonetheless use our service for editing or translation. Okay, so I went and just found the national rank. This is a couple years old. It's based on citations that are in Scopus. But if you look at by country, how many publications are coming out, you'll see that these countries that are represented are also among the most prodigious in terms of producing publications. Okay, we did get a really interesting, a really good, I'd say, split of people that are early in their publication careers and people that are well established. And so this enables us to sort of say that it's not like we're just hitting people that maybe haven't published very often and therefore don't understand the process. Some of these people have published many, many papers and still had some suggestions.
We asked how comfortable they are writing manuscripts in English. We had sent the survey in English, so it's not surprising that for a majority of them, they felt at least somewhat comfortable. And we also asked if they had been asked to review papers for an English language journal. And for about 3/4 of them, the answer was yes. And so I found this interesting because it says that they've also been on the other side. They're not just sending their papers away to English language journals, they're also doing reviews for them. And it also highlights the fact that in a number of cases for a journal, you may have reviewers for whom they don't feel perfectly comfortable with the English language. And there may be ways to, again, to help them through that process more easily. Okay, so here, what were the answers? So here are a couple of the questions that we asked. One is, what are the top 3 challenges that you face when submitting to an English language journal? And we gave them a list of about, I think, 9 or 10, and also the option to choose other and write in an answer. 2 of them clearly stood out as being the most frequently selected, and perhaps they're fairly intuitive. One is the correcting the English text. So again, if they only feel somewhat comfortable writing in English, they just need a little extra help feeling confident that they're saying what they mean to say. But they also mentioned responding to reviewers' comments. And I think that that's a very related idea in that when they're trying to give voice to their responses, they didn't feel as confident doing that. The next 2 down were formatting and translating. So obviously for some, they really felt like they just wanted to start and write in their own language and then translate it. I'll get to the formatting in a moment. And then some other things that, again, can be problems sort of for anyone trying to write and submit a journal article. Figuring out if the topic is a good fit, writing the cover letter, understanding the guidelines or correspondence, and so on. So I pulled out a couple of the comments from when people did want to say more than just click the answers. And, in some cases they say the websites are unfriendly. I think for them that's more an indication of, again, the language barrier. They said they had difficulty translating their ideas into simple and clear writing, so that goes along with the number 1 answer that we saw. And then the second, again, convincing the reviewers that there are different positions. And I think that this is, in a number of cases, you could ask people who are native speakers of English, and they're going to answer some of these things too. But one thing that we did see come up over and over, or at least a number of times, was something like this, where it says, the major challenge is to overpass the unspoken barriers to publish posed to those submitting papers from outside the U.S. and Europe. And I think that in a number of cases, there's this perceived barrier, and in a number of ways, I feel like we can eliminate this consideration that there's this barrier simply by helping the second language authors through the process. And it may be that just because they're having difficulty with it, they're feeling like they're being punished for some reason. Not to say that there are individual cases where the name of the person on the article may make a difference, but I think largely this is indicative of the bigger issue of just the language. Okay, so we asked, well, what would you like publishers to do to help you through the publication process? And you can see that the results were more, they seem to like a lot of these different topics. So the top 3 that cluster pretty nicely at the top are to provide a template with proper manuscript formatting, to suggest other journals that may be a better fit, and to create an easy process for pre-submission inquiry. And again, these are things that we offered, not necessarily thinking that everyone's going to suddenly say, well, we're not accepting your article, but you should go to this service, but more to understand, or to this competitor journal, for instance, but more to just understand what the authors and customers were looking for. Okay, they did mention providing clearer author guidelines and suggesting editing and translation services. So maybe they knew that they wanted a little help, but they didn't know quite where to get it. And last, making the website easier to use, recommending a service to help with the exchange with the reviewers. Very few suggested translating the website. So I think in a number of cases they want to work in English. They're fine with that, but that there's still just those little things that are standing in their way. So I pulled out a few comments that we got in this section where they say that they have a contradictory template and instructions, and that they really desire a quick decision about the fit of the manuscript. This one I enjoyed, just be gentle on non-native writers with respect to their language. And again, a lot of times this may stem from one bad experience somewhere. They asked for the moon. They said we should have one common reference format, and again, a number of the things that I think that people would ask for simply cannot be implemented, but I feel like I can offer some suggestions of maybe just one step closer. And they said things like they need to avoid conflict of interest. They brought conflict of interest up a lot. And again, I think this is more a matter of perception than a matter of there really being a conflict of interest in a number of these cases. It may be, however, that they just don't necessarily feel like they understand the journal's position and how the journal is working to avoid those conflicts. Okay, so some recommendations that I think stem from the data that we found. In terms of the editorial process, it seems that asking about pre-submission inquiries and conflict of interest were two of the things that we saw very frequently. And so it may be a matter of clarifying and explicitly stating the policy on these two things. Maybe instead of having them wherever they are within the author guidelines, they could be pulled aside and just be a separate bullet point, something like that. Make it easy to sort of just click and say, what do you do if you want to ask about your paper, or what is the journal doing to prevent conflicts of interest? Providing a guide for the reviewers, and again, this is twofold. One is that the people that are sending their papers to the journal can see what the reviewers are being told, but also in a number of cases, you may have reviewers who are speaking English as a second language and may just really want a nice, explicit set of statements about what they should be doing. And this could include a description of how to write comments to the authors in clear and understandable English, in a way to say, again, we're not expecting the reviewers that they're already swamped for time. It's something that they're doing often, are definitely for free and because it's a service to their community. But there are some simple things that they could do, perhaps, to make their comments more easily understood and improve that exchange. One example would be defining a threshold for acceptable language quality. And that says to the second language author, okay, we're not just picking on you. We're saying, we need to be able to understand the science, right? And that's clearly the case. I'm not saying that we should accept every paper regardless of how well it's written. It needs to be written well enough that you can understand what's going on. So that's definitely something that could be included. And if, as a journal or a publisher, you come across services or other sort of resources, they don't necessarily even need to be vendors, but resources that could help them with responding to reviewers or with selecting a journal, that it may be worth placing those somewhere on the site. As for the website itself, I think using clear and simple language, and I had a discussion with Philip about this before this panel, especially in the author guideline and the aims and scope, where they're really going for the most information and to try to find the fit and to try to make sure that they're following the rules. So I've put a couple of things that research shows these are difficult for second language authors, and some of them are more specific to certain languages than others, but in general, if you keep the sentences to about 20 words or less, that helps a lot. That helps a lot for English readers, but much less someone for whom they may have only studied for a couple of years. Certain verbs we call phrasal verbs that have these combinations of prepositions and things. Those can be very difficult when you're looking at it and you're imagining like cutting back and on something. And so sometimes those, again, they're not used that frequently, but they can be very tricky. Other times, clusters of small words, again, that when the person, as they are reading, they're sort of trying to translate each word and understand the key concepts. It may be trickier to do that, especially with prepositions that can have multiple versions in a different language or that don't exist in a different language. One interesting one is a double negative, which, again, probably is not coming up so frequently, but when we say something is not uncommon in English, that's understood to mean it happens. But in a number of other languages, when you use two negatives, you're actually emphasizing the negative. And so by that they would read that as extremely, extremely uncommon, And then there's all these other sort of things that we do fairly frequently, saying it is imperative, it is. And in some languages that structure exists, but in many it doesn't. And so it sends the reader suddenly searching for what it is and what was in the last sentence that's imperative. So So some other suggestions, in a lot of cases that perhaps pictures can be better than words. They do sometimes help out. A submission checklist, which a lot of journals currently do. But just to give them a final point to say, did you make sure you did these really critical things that we're going to have to turn it back to you if you haven't done. If, you know, the formatting, if you could provide a template or just an example of what a correctly formatted paper is, for a manuscript at least, that seems like something that would be welcomed by a number of the countries that we looked at. That was one of the most common things. And then again, outside services that could help them with editing and translation. And there's certainly a number of wonderful ones. I did want to say that we are launching a free author resources site tomorrow that's going to cover a number of the things that we talked about, like how to deal with reviewers, how to, you know, choose a journal. We're going to have a weekly editing tip that tells them maybe the difference. What does it mean to less? When do you say less? When do you say fewer? I mean, that's just one example of something we might write. And so this is something, again, that if you're interested, that could be posted on a site, just as an example of, you know, there's a number of questions in the publication process, and anything we can do to make that easier. Okay, so to summarize, to end, obviously the second language authors, they're going to continue to send manuscripts, and like Aaron pointed out, in a number of countries, that number is going up. And so it's, you know, as a journal or a publisher or anything scientific, scholarly, you really want to attract the best and brightest, regardless of their language skill. And so giving them tools to make their writing better or help them find a way to do that just makes the whole process simpler and faster, and perpetuates the cycle and accelerates all of discovery. And so then understanding the specific concerns can lead to an easier submission process, really for everyone. I just want to thank a couple people briefly. Keith, my colleague who's here in attendance, who helped with the survey, and Lisa and Alicia, and all the respondents that provided such valuable input. So, thank you.
Well, two great presentations. Any burning questions for Ben? Yes.
Hi, Steve Sayer with Anesthesia and Analgesia. Question about plagiarism. We began scanning all of our manuscripts for plagiarism about 1.5 years ago, and an inordinate percentage seems to be coming from non-North American authors. It seems to be a key issue in terms of the educational process and all that stuff, and I was just wondering how you're doing that and how you're advising your clients.
Yeah, I'll do this just to make sure everyone can hear me. Your point is extremely well taken, and in a number of ways it's actually a cultural issue, and in some cultures quoting someone directly is a form of like acknowledging how much you hold them in esteem. Topics that we actually have planned to discuss more on our resource site
is just, you know, what really constitutes plagiarism and what you really need to do self-plagiarism. I mean, there's things that in the scholarly industry you just have to watch out for. It's harder in terms of our author services. If we get a manuscript to edit, we don't at this time run it through Authenticate or anything, but I suppose we could we could talk more about that. But yeah, that's a really good point, and I think that would be a great way that we could sort of hopefully stem that tide. So thank you.
Just sorry, on a sideline, I mean, I know the person very well. He's one of my neighbors, or used to be one of my neighbors before I moved from house. We had actually spent a couple of weeks editing a paper which was submitted to us. And we really put hard work in it to make it look right. And then we put it into Authenticate, and then it came up with a score of 75. And then we decided we better not publish that one. And before we put anything into peer review, we check it first. It's very prevalent. You've got to be extremely on the lookout for that, and you've got to make sure that your workflow adapts with that. The same paper then was resubmitted for us, and What did we do? We put it into Authenticate. Oh, it's still 72%. So I think now he's given up. But really, it is prevalent in that part of the world. It's especially when you come up as a new publisher, people try to get away with it, and you just got to watch out for it.
If I can just address that. I've been spending the past several years every year going and lecturing to authors around China in different contexts, and have found that understanding really what plagiarism is, getting the definition of plagiarism, is something that's fairly quickly absorbed and recognized. But the if not that, then what question is left completely unanswered. So one of my big bailiwicks right now is to try and get publishers to say, offer some examples of the strategic use of citations. If you use citations properly, you can avoid plagiarism. So for publishers to not just say, don't do this, but do that, do something else, and have it be teaching part of the argument structure of science. That's not easy to do. It can be domain specific, but it can be a very powerful learning element for authors, many of whom actually want to do the right thing, but just don't know how. And this is for native speakers too, by the way.